Hi, I'm Lee Carter, and I'm recording the fourth installment on chapter 3 of the book of Ruth. I hope this has been a study that you've been found easy to keep up with and interesting, and that it's been profitable for you. It's been good for me to go back through it again. I know that chapter 2 was a little bit longer than 30 minutes, and this one is also a little bit longer than 30 minutes. But chapter 4 will be a little bit shorter. We'll finish up in the next session. So we saw at the end of chapter 2 that Boaz has been identified as a relative of Elimelech's, which Naomi, no doubt, has realized that makes him potentially someone who can redeem them. Naomi realizes also that the Lord has not forgotten her. She says that the Lord has not forsaken the living or the dead. Through Boaz, their family can be redeemed, and Elimelech's line will not end. So he's blessed not only those who are living, but he's also remembered the ones who are gone. When Ruth tells Naomi that Boaz has told her to stay near to his workers until the harvest, Naomi agrees that this is a really good plan. She warns Ruth that people should not see her in any other fields, and Ruth wisely follows the counsel of Naomi and accepts Boaz's generosity. It's going to be their salvation, not only for the present, but it's also going to be their salvation in the future. At the beginning of this, I want to take a look at a few agricultural terms. As chapter 3 begins, Ruth has been working for Boaz for about 3 months, and she's still living with Naomi, but that was never a long-term solution. And so, they're still two widows living on their own, which is not a safe situation for them in Israel at this point. Life couldn't have been easy in Israel for either of them. Boaz does help tremendously, but gleaning would have been hard work for sure. Now, I want to talk about a couple of other harvest terms since we're at the harvest. They're going to come into play. One is winnowing, and the other is threshing, or the threshing floor. So if you're where you can see the picture, hopefully this will help a little bit. But even if you're just listening in the car and you can't see the picture, threshing is the process through which the grains of a cereal like plant, barley, oats, wheat, something like that, is removed from its pod, its protective pod. And it comes with some sort of beating, either with a flail or trampling with the feet of animals, which is what we're going to see in Ruth. Once the pods of grain have been cracked open by the animal's weight, winnowing is the next part of the process. It's what they use. It's the process they use to collect the grain, to get rid of the chaff and to collect the usable parts. So winnowing means to blow something away until you're left with what you want. So it has two parts. It's a two-person job. Winnowing is. The harvesters would have used a winnowing fan and a winnowing fork. A winnowing fork is much like a pitchfork, and they would throw what the animal had trodden, had walked on, into the air, and usually the women or children then would take the winnowing fan to blow the grass to make a wind, and then all of the parts of the grass, the stalk, the pods, which were lightweight, would be blown away, or at least be blown out of the grain, and the grain, which was heavier, would drop, and then they would have the usable part to collect. If you think about this process, it brings a whole new light to Matthew chapter 3 and verse 12, when Jesus speaks about the judgment and says that God's winnowing fan is in his hand, and he will thoroughly clean out his threshing floor and gather his wheat into the barn, but he will burn up the chaff in the unquenchable fire. It's a process that the audience would have understood, and it is helpful for us too to understand it. We definitely do not want to be the chaff. So some of you may already know this, but again, I said at the beginning of this, I'm a bit of a city girl, and so I didn't know the harvesting terms. I went into my explanation of this where I am worshiping now in Darmstadt, and the ladies all started looking at each other and smiling. This apparently is still the way things are done in Ghana and other countries that are agricultural. And one of the ladies told me that her job as a child had been the winnowing fan. So it's a job that's given to children often. Anyway, these verses tell us that the harvest has been completed and it's time for the winnowing. The threshing floors were usually public places with animals that several landowners would have rented out the use of. So it's Boaz doesn't necessarily have his own threshing floor. It is probably a central location, and he's renting it out. And because of that, he's going to sleep at the threshing floor to protect his harvest from thieves. Tonight, he's winnowing the barley, and Naomi, because she's familiar with the customs, knows that a feast is going to occur to celebrate the end of the harvest. And I would imagine this would be a particularly sweet celebration since they're recovering from a famine. This may be the first good harvest that they've had in, at least 10 years, right? I mean, that's how long we know for sure that Naomi and Mahlon and Chilion were in Moab, probably more like 15 or 20. Naomi is familiar with the way things work, though, and she tells Ruth how they were going to let Boaz know that they want his protection. All right. Chapter 3 is going to revolve around the legal responsibility of Boaz that he has towards Ruth and how Ruth and Naomi are going to go about requesting that he redeems them. Naomi hopes to restore the family, both in name and reputation, along with possibly some inheritance. And although I haven't been very protective of Naomi up to this point, in her defense, she's not being manipulative or greedy. These are very serious and important matters, and Boaz has set himself up to be the redeemer. And I'd also like to point out that our Ruth is not a shrinking violet with no mind of her own. So the speculation that Naomi pushes Ruth around or manipulates her isn't consistent with the things that we know about Ruth thus far. We've seen her resolve. We've seen her courage. We've seen her integrity. She isn't being pushed around by Naomi. Naomi is the older woman who understands their situation and their landscape, both cultural and practical. And they have to operate within that culture. She's the one who knows how to proceed. Ruth doesn't listen to Naomi and do as she's told because she's some timid little mouse of a girl. She listens and obeys because she's smart. She trusts Naomi. Naomi says, she begins by, do you believe that I want what's best for you? Whatever Naomi's spiritual influence has been on Ruth up to now, she must have shown Ruth incredible kindness and patience and love. For Ruth to have such loyalty, Naomi has inspired an incredible amount of loyalty in Ruth. Ruth clung to Naomi, if you'll remember, as they were leaving Moab. Naomi is an anchor in Ruth's life. There's no question. It's really interesting when you think that Ruth had obviously had no children. She was married for 10 years to Naomi's son, but no children were born. And again, culturally, that's humiliating. And the humiliation would have been Ruth's, not Mahlon's. And yet Naomi doesn't seem to have been unkind to Ruth about it. She doesn't seem to have been critical or gossiped about Ruth. She didn't cast Ruth out or lord it over her that she herself had given birth to 2 sons. Why couldn't Ruth do the same? Ruth listens to Naomi because Naomi has apparently always acted with kindness towards Ruth, even when others would have cast her aside. And now Ruth trusts Naomi. She trusts her enough to follow her advice. Ruth, I think there's a lesson here for us older women in how we approach the younger women. Ruth listens because Naomi has been kind. And I think we need to evaluate ourselves and ask, are we always kind? Are we loyal when we deal with young women and offer advice and guidance? Have we spent time in the scriptures so that we have some wisdom in our heads with which to guide them? Do we act out of love and not out of some desire just to be in the know, or worse, to live vicariously through the younger women? Are we helping guide them so that they can have rich and peaceful lives with husbands who they love and who love them, who will be good spiritual leaders in a Christian home? What do we have to give them? I would encourage the older women among us and the younger women who, by the way, before you know it, will be older women. Happens really fast. To think about what models we are for the younger women. In Titus chapter 2, verses 1 through 5, there's a direction that's given to older men, but it says, likewise, older women, be sober, be reverent, be temperate, be sound in faith and love and patience. Plus, be reverent in behavior, not slanderers, not given to much wine, teachers of good things. He continues to say that older women are to admonish, which means to encourage through advice. The young women to love their husbands, to love their children, to be discreet and chaste, homemakers, good and obedient to their husbands, that the word of God may not be blasphemed. Wow. You want to serve? That's how you do it. You build the kingdom. Strengthen the family. Help young women to be encouraged, especially those that are in the trenches with little children who are so busy. You would lay down at night sometimes and not even know what you'd done during the day. It's been so busy. So many things happen. Older women need to be able to help younger women have some perspective. What do we have? It's really important service. And I'm going to tell you something. We can't do it if what we have in our heads is the news or wisdom of the world or the interests of this world. You do not need to read self-help books. You do not need to know what's happening on Facebook or Pinterest. You do not need to listen to Dr. Phil or whoever is giving advice on television now in America. You need the wisdom of God. You need to know what God says. I told my son a long time ago that I have absolutely nothing of value to offer him other than God and his mercy and his wisdom. That's what we offer to others. We don't offer an education or an inheritance or a roof and hot meals. We may provide those things that might come, but that is not what we offer someone that will change their lives, that will stabilize them. We have God. That's it. That's all I had to offer. And I don't even really offer that. God does that. Young women, when you find an older woman who models these attributes, you need to listen to her. When you find an old woman who is wise and patient, who is in the Word of God, then you need to listen to her. I wish I had listened when people had tried to tell me things, but I was arrogant and rebellious. Those are not nice words, but that's what it is. I didn't want to hear what anybody had to say. I wanted to do what I wanted to do. And I caused myself a lot of trouble in that rebellion. You can have your own will and your own thoughts in your head. Listening doesn't make you weak, it makes you smart. Ruth realizes that Naomi knows things that she doesn't know, and so she listens to her. Naomi has a plan. Naomi wants Boaz to be aware of his responsibility, and so she gives Ruth what seem to be some puzzling instructions. So we're going to read chapter 3, verses 1 through 5. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, shall I not seek security for you, that it may be well with you? Now Boaz, whose young women you were with, is he not our relative? In fact, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Therefore, wash yourself and anoint yourself. Put on your best garment and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. Then it shall be when he lies down that you shall notice the place where he lies, and you shall go in, uncover his feet, and lie down, and he will tell you what you should do." And she said to her, "All that you say to me, I will do." When we look at Naomi's instructions closely, her end goal reveals itself. Naomi tells Ruth to wash and anoint herself and put on her best garments. These are typically bridal preparations. This is not about a night of passion. They are not trying to trick Boaz into something. Ruth is to sneak into the party and watch where Boaz lays down. She is to go when no one can see her and lay at his feet after removing his outer garment. Okay, now once I started reading commentaries about Ruth's actions, I was actually pretty startled to discover how many reputable Bible commentaries deal with the idea that the use of the word feet is actually a term that means below the waist, and it could be used to insinuate that what Ruth is doing is seducing Boaz. In fact, many people actually refer to this as the seduction scene. Now, there are just as many that disregard that idea, but almost all of them mention it. So I decided it needed to be brought up because the question that the commentaries really are dealing with is whether or not Ruth and Boaz have a sexual relationship on this night. Now, I have to tell you, I categorically, absolutely do not believe that any kind of sexual behavior takes place here. But first of all, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't ring true with the tenor of the book at all. And I find it contradictory to absolutely everything we know about Ruth and Boaz to this point. Not to mention, if the book of Ruth was written as during David's reign as some sort of good PR by Samuel to in a way that David's personal family history would be then put into the Chronicles of the Kings, this doesn't seem like the way to go about making it look good. Why would you choose a story that talks about your great grandmother and your great grandfather having a relationship that's shameful and sinful? It just makes no sense. And so actually, usually when we tell stories of people who are long gone or generations past, we do the opposite. We make them nicer. We put a nice face on it. We romanticize and idealize people. And so this just doesn't make sense if that is when and why this book was written. It would have been counterproductive. However, something happens between Naomi and Boaz, and we do need to at least have a basic understanding. This idea that she goes and lays at his feet and covers herself, uncover his feet, lay down at them, and cover yourself with his cloak. If we remember that in chapter 2 and verse 20, Naomi calls Boaz the kinsman redeemer. He is a relative, and Naomi wants security for Ruth. And so she instructs her to do this thing that obviously Boaz understands. One commentary suggested that this is still a bridal custom that's still practiced in some of the Eastern countries today, that when women get into bed with their husbands, they go in from the foot of the bed and they climb in underneath the covers. They creep up next to their husbands because it's an act of submission and of modesty. Another idea is that it was a long held tradition that servants would lay at their master's feet and draw the cloak or blanket around them. And that's another symbol of submission and belonging. And perhaps it's Ruth's way of saying that she would like to be one of his servants. There was some talk about in the Orient, it's still traditional in a marriage ceremony for the groom to cover his bride with his outer garment. And it suggests this idea of protection. The bottom line is that we don't know what is happening. We are never going to be 100% clear on Naomi's instructions. We're just not. It's not part of the law. This act of lying at one's feet. But Ruth does as she's told, and Boaz understands it. We don't have to completely get it. Boaz gets it. He knows exactly what's happening here. There doesn't seem to be any question on his part. The whole book of Ruth shows that Boaz is a man of extraordinary character, caution, and self-restraint. And Ruth is a virtuous young woman. I just don't see how people can say that what's happening here is that they're participating in fornication. Well, actually, yes, I can see how people say that, because people make everything corrupt and vile, which is another good reason for us to closely guard our reputations. We always have to stay above speculation, because people can turn anything into something filthy. We need to be beyond reproach in action and reputation. We live in a world where people just expect and accept the worst and are actually shocked by righteous behavior, by purity. And so we have to be those people who are shocking in our purity, that we have integrity that can't be questioned. In fact, my reputation really should be something that when somebody says something bad about me, the people who know me should say, that just doesn't sound right. Boaz knows Ruth's reputation, and so he doesn't think anything bad about her. She's not being immodest, and he doesn't seem to question the purity of her actions. It's just strange to us, and we don't understand it. But Boaz understands what she's doing, and she impresses him again. When Boaz wakes around midnight and realizes that someone is sleeping at his feet, he can't see her. He asks, "Who's there?" And Ruth uses the same image that Boaz used in chapter 2 when he referred to Ruth's flight as her having taken refuge under the wing of the God of Israel. And now she has to be taken under his wing as well. For you are a close relation. And there's the point. He sees this as a proposal of marriage. And that is what it is. She is suggesting that he, as a close relative, can protect, provide for, and redeem both herself and Naomi. She is offering herself in marriage. It's very bold what Ruth does, and it could have had some bad side effects, but because it's Boaz, he actually commends her. It's risky. I mean, she is a woman from Moab who has placed herself in what could be a questionable situation if Boaz were the type to take advantage of her or to brag or to talk big. Her position at his feet is humble and submissive. This is not the first time she's been at Boaz's feet. She falls at his feet in chapter 2 as well, in verse 10, when he treats her kindly. Boaz is startled, for sure. We can see that in his language. But he's also flattered. He says that she could have gone after a younger man, but she doesn't, which shows her love and loyalty to Naomi. Ruth realizes the importance of restoring the family name, and she needs someone who will care for both of them. She and Naomi are a package deal. And he commends Ruth for that, for her loyalty to her mother-in-law, and says that she has shown more kindness at the end than she did at the beginning even. Her kindness is selfless. He commends her for her virtue. Everyone in town knows you to be a virtuous woman, and he tells her not to be afraid. Boaz is willing to be the redeemer. But in the story, we come to a hitch. There's a closer relative, and Boaz has to speak to him first. So according to the law, this closer relative, who is possibly Boaz's older brother, or could even be Elimelech's brother, whoever he is, he has refusal rights to marry Ruth. So Boaz tells Ruth that he will do what she's asked of him, but they have to talk to this other person first. So either way, Ruth has a new husband. I mean, that's guaranteed. Boaz cautions Ruth to stay at his feet. Like Naomi, Boaz instructs Ruth on their next steps, and Ruth is going to follow his lead. They have to get up before anyone else can tell who Ruth is as she's leaving the threshing floor. I'm guessing that means they've got to be up before daybreak. I think Boaz is trying to protect her reputation again. He tells her that everyone in town knows that she's virtuous, but he doesn't want them to see her leaving his threshing floor. There's a lot of possibilities for this. Perhaps he worries that it could be used as an excuse for the closer relative to get out of marrying Ruth and ruin any chance that he would have of marrying her as well. He doesn't seem to think that it could be used against her or him if anyone saw her. I'm sorry, he does seem to think it could be used against her or him if anyone saw her. And again, what she does has some risk in it. And plus, if the other relative does want to marry her, he doesn't want her future ruined by everyone saying that she had stayed with him or anyone starting that rumor. When she leaves, he loads her down again with grain. He gives her 6 ephahs of barley to take home this time. So just to remind you, an ephah is around 22 liters or 6 US gallons. So she's leaving with 130 liters or 36 gallons of barley. This is an enormous amount of food, and it would have been really heavy. It must mostly be on her head and back. The scripture does say that he laid it on her, which I'm sure she would have had trouble lifting it on herself. She probably couldn't have picked it up. He's put close to 200 pounds or 96 kilos of grain on her for her to carry home. This is enough food for several weeks. It's almost humorous that Naomi asks, "Is that you?" when Ruth comes in. I have visions of Ruth being so covered up by the grain that she's carrying that maybe it's hard for Naomi to see who's coming through the door. One commentary suggested that Naomi's question is because Ruth is so excited by what's happening and happy that her demeanor has completely changed with this new hope, and that Naomi's question could possibly indicate a complete change in mood. Or another commentary said it could be really more a question of, has your status changed? You know, is there something that I need to know? Are you married or engaged or something like that? Is that you? Whatever Naomi means, Ruth's answer could not be more clear. Not only does she tell Naomi all that Boaz has said, but Ruth tells her that he didn't send her back empty-handed. It's really interesting, the use of empty-handed, because emptiness versus fullness has been a part of this story all along. It's certainly a theme. Naomi had said that she left Israel full and returned empty. But now, with Boaz, their potential redeemer, Ruth is not empty-handed. He has not left her empty-handed. She is, in fact, full of food. But more importantly, she is full of hope. God does not send us out empty-handed. We are not empty. He is the only source of true hope. When I taught this lesson the first time in Darmstadt, one of our sisters had just been baptized the day before. And when I asked her, I saw her at worship service and I asked her how she felt. Her answer was that she felt empty. And it was interesting because we were doing this lesson, but I knew what she meant. We are empty of some things. We're empty of anger, empty of impatience and sorrow. We are empty of despair and hopelessness. In those ways, God does empty us out. And then he fills us up with peace and love and joy and patience and faith, ties that bind us, and hope. He gives us armor for the battles ahead and fully equips us for tasks at hand. God does not send us out empty-handed. But like Ruth, we have to be diligent and hardworking to receive his favor. Although the chapter ends with tension, what will become of Ruth and Boaz? The final word in chapter 3 belongs to Naomi. She tells Ruth just to sit tight, that she won't have to wait long for news. It's funny that she tells Ruth to sit still. To me, it seems that Ruth is full of excitement over this turn of events, and why shouldn't she be? Naomi believes that Boaz is probably excited too, because she tells Ruth that he will not rest until he has taken care of this matter. Today, she says. In the middle of the barley harvest, after the winnowing and the feast, they've been up at the crack of dawn. He sent her home with 200 pounds of food. And Naomi says, oh yeah, he'll take care of this today. This will all be sorted. Sit tight and wait for word. It won't be long. And at the beginning of Act 4, we see that Naomi is correct. Boaz, it seems, has gone directly to the gate of the city, where all the business of Bethlehem is conducted. He is a man on a mission, and we are going to look at his bargaining skills in our final lesson on chapter 4. I appreciate you joining me. I hope this has been good for you. It's certainly been a good study for me, and I appreciate any feedback you have to offer. Have a good night.